This year our theme is Resilient Communities. We're in New Orleans, where Katrina devastated this city. And in preparing for this session, I was kind of struggling with what the word resilient means in the context of rebuilding. And I asked a bunch of people, what their ideas were for how that word fit. And then I had an aha experience. I went yesterday with a group of volunteers. There were actually 700 volunteers that were deployed to 25 different city parks. We were organized by two kind of sponsors of the activity to build a playground and to build park benches. Prior to that, there had been a swimming pool that had been revitalized. This neighborhood we went to was just devastated by Katrina. Homes continued to be vacant. Maybe one out of every 3 or 4 homes is occupied. The others are just bricks and wood and big X marks on the doors. And where homes have been attempted to be rebuilt, vandals went in and took copper and other things and sold them in the black market or whatever. And so the aha moment I had was this park that was built. 3 hours after we got there was a whole playground set. There were 80 new trees planted. There were park benches and tables, picnic tables constructed. This park, which was a blank slate, just grass and a fence around it, now is a place that people will want to go. And those homes that line that park, which lay vacant, I can see in my mind the young mother that wants to see her kid playing in a park, and they want to occupy those homes, and they're going to bring a new energy, a new life to that community that didn't exist before. And so when I think of resiliency, I think of more than just the benches and the tables and the playground, and it's beautiful. I mean, these are amazing. It's brand new park facilities, but it's about the spirit of the park and what it means to that community. And there's so many characteristics to resiliency. And one of the more critical, I think, components of resiliency in any community, whether it's in a disaster or just in regular times, is the role that faith institutions play.
My name is Hei Pin Im, and I serve as one of the 7 presidential appointees on the board for the Corporation for National and Community Service. Every year, I have the privilege to share this stage with Neil, and I'm very grateful to Neil for his passion for recognizing the faith community and the important role that you play in terms of resiliency, contribution to the country, but also particularly in the area of service. I do want to thank again the Points of Light Institute for their partnership in this conference as well. As we approach the 10th anniversary of 9/11, we could reflect upon the dangers of misplaced faith. And we could also look upon history and see, again, the consequences of misplaced faith. But on the other hand, I think when faith is placed in the rightful place, amazing things can happen. A few years ago, I had the privilege of going to Europe and visiting Poland. And I was amazed that for over 400 years, that nation was able to hold it together because of their common faith. I could also say about the Jewish community is another huge contingency that, again, because of faith, they were able to overcome many adversities. I could tell you about the Korean community as well. There is a saying that whoever comes to pick you up at the airport, that is the job that you will eventually have. But it is a very tight-knit community, and in 2003, we celebrated over 100 years of immigration history in the U.S., but it also was the 100th year anniversary of the Korean American Church. And the church played a vital role in terms of helping the South Korea, or Korea, be able to overcome the Japan's rule over Korea. And most recently, I would say during the LA riots. Again, the 20th anniversary of the LA riots will be happening in April next year. But again, the faith community plays such an important role. And I can not say much more about the role of the faith community in the Katrina here in New Orleans. So I just want to say that the faith community plays such a huge role, a transformative power, and to be able to have a forum in which we can lift up the faith community and to be able to partner with them is an important priority of the Corporation for National and Community Service.
Faith-based organizations are central to community resiliency. The faith community are usually the first groups of people to respond to disasters and the last folks out. They're the ones who are often there through the long-term recovery phase. And of course, right here in this great city, after Hurricane Katrina, the faith community in New Orleans and across the Gulf Coast opened their doors to thousands of volunteers, which tremendously helped initiate the immediate relief and recovery of this community. And then during the Gulf oil spill, a very different type of disaster where FEMA support was limited, the faith community was essential in meeting social service needs and continues to be essential to this day. But it's not all roses. In fact, there are some challenges that they're facing and that we're facing. One of the main challenges is that they're not plugged in enough. Secular nonprofits are twice as likely to work with state and local governments than faith-based groups. More integration into emergency management structures is needed. We're trying to do that through our FEMA faith-based office, but we could use your help in that process. On a related point, preparation continues to be a challenge among faith-based groups. They're frequently not at the table in the early days when the plans are being pulled together and when we're talking about preparedness. And so therefore, they're not equipped to respond as well as they might be able to if they had been there at that table. Some progress has been made in this area after Katrina and Rita, but much more needs to be done. President Obama knows full well the role of faith-based groups in community resiliency. I was working with him in his Senate office when he was Senator Obama right after Hurricane Katrina, and one of the first things I remember him doing was holding a meeting just probably 6 or 8 weeks after the hurricane with faith-based organizations. We were getting calls from groups here in New Orleans and across the Gulf Coast that FEMA was doing as much as they could, and the Red Cross were doing as much as they could, but they weren't connected to the groups who had networks into affected communities, especially into minority communities and hard-to-reach communities. And so we pulled everyone up here. We got the Red Cross and FEMA to send their top representatives, and then sat down with the AME bishop and with the Catholic leaders and with local voluntary organizations. And we said, you need to listen to them. You need to learn from them. You need to understand where they are and where their people are. And we think that some significant partnerships were made in that meeting that had an impact in the days ahead.
To each one of you has experienced a disaster in some way or another. And I'm wondering what it was like.
My name is Reverend Dejon, and I've been through 2 disasters in New Orleans. The first one was Hurricane Betsy. It was not as horrific as Katrina, but it was devastating nonetheless. Went by the church. There was 7 feet of water in the church. And if you had been in the church, you would have said, what in the world was the water doing? And I said, well, God, here I am. Now, what am I going to do at this time? So we immediately began to take out the roll to search for members of the church to find out where they was, try at least to put our hands on them. Of course, some we did, some died, some they were fragmented all over the United States of America. But that little small church where I'm from, called Ebenezer Baptist Church, it was a handful of us. We came back, tried to clean up the church, couldn't do it. The AmeriCorps came and cleaned out the church, and I want to tell you how faith-based, how that resiliency runs. They came in and gutted the church, and after that, this church out of Arizona called and says, we're looking for a church to rebuild. Now, they wanted to go to a big church. We have this little small church in a very poor community, and there was an argument on where they would go. I said, you come into Ebenezer. We need your help. So the guy said, let me check out the 2 churches. Well, he ended up coming to Ebenezer, of which we built this church back. But what I wanted to really emphasize is those people with the resilience were people who had been affected. You cannot take the church, the faith-based group, and set up inside and say, this is the faith-based group, and they came in. The golden rule say, do unto others as you have them do unto you. So if I'm in trouble, you're in trouble, we got to find some way to help each other.
Can communities actually prepare for disasters? There's immediately following disasters, people and communities will say, we need to be better prepared, and so there will be some efforts toward that. But as time goes on, and moving away from a disaster, it's a very difficult challenge that people scratch their heads around.
I think we need to armor the community beforehand and really have the community be the one that makes the ultimate decision concerning whether or not to come back. If I were to do it again, I would have moved much quicker and rely less on the powers that be. And then by that I mean for the school. It took the state some 7-8 months before it can determine whether or not to open a school in our area. And the problem with that, I remember talking to a woman with 2 or 3 children, calling her on the phone saying, she called, and I said, well, why don't you come back? She said, I would love to. I have 3 children, 2 or 3 children. Is there a school nearby where I can put my children? The answer was no. Well, she can't come back. The other, and that's why we in waiting for the state's authority on education, it took us so long. So finally, we made the decision just to charter our own schools so that in the future, community members as board members would determine whether or not to reopen the school, not someone else. And also, same thing with medical services. The problem was one of our people who returned to work, he was fixing his roof. He fell and broke both of his legs. Well, the nearest hospital was about 23 miles away. That's when I stopped and said, whoa. Until we have medical services nearby, people would be afraid to come back. That was a young man. What about an older person? So that's why we are opening our own community health center. And I think somehow there has to be that armoring of the community locally.
Disaster doesn't happen in isolation. Disaster strikes people of every faith, every ethnicity, every economic background, but disaster exacerbates the effects of poverty, and persistent poverty exacerbates the effects of a disaster. And we saw that play out in the devastating earthquake in Haiti. You contrast that with the earthquake in in Chile, where because you had a country that didn't suffer such devastating effects of poverty beforehand, communities that are in a different kind of economic condition can actually be more prepared in the context of a disaster. So I think one thing we have to do as faith communities and as leaders and representatives of faith communities is address those issues of poverty. And service is one part of how we address that, but it's not the only. So one of the things that we've seen play out in the wake of Katrina is service as part of a blended set of approaches that include advocacy, that include economic development. There's a relatively recent fund that was established, a pooled community development fund called the Isaiah Fund that's operating in New Orleans, that was founded by an interfaith, first of its kind, interfaith collaboration of organizations, Jewish organizations, several different Christian denominational organizations, and others, that is making critical loans for community organizations and small businesses in New Orleans. And so we've had models like that. We've had models where 5,000 Jewish college students come and do hands-on service towards rebuilding in New Orleans, partnering with community members side by side with multiple faith communities in New Orleans. But I think it's a mistake to think that that disaster preparedness, that better coordination is enough when we also face issues really of deep and ingrained structural problems that we have to tackle at the same time. I think that there is something good that has come out of this, which is the fact that in New Orleans, people bringing their faith backgrounds, working under the auspices of a Jewish organization, a Christian organization, an Islamic organization, are for the first time working together